Halfway through his meal, the prisoner suddenly dropped the spoon he was holding. He noticed that half of it had fallen into shadow. Mike paused thoughtfully, then kicked the spoon back toward the door and quietly covered it with his foot. Soon enough, the guard came to collect the meal trays. The careless guard didn't even glance down before gathering up the dishes and walking away. The moment the guard left, Mike snatched up the spoon and began grinding it repeatedly against the rough floor. Before long, he tested the sharpened utensil's effectiveness. To his surprise, with just a gentle pry, the wooden plank on the cell door immediately loosened. Seeing the enormous gap that suddenly appeared before him, Mike made a bold decision on the spot. But realizing it was still daylight and guards could come by at any moment, he didn't dare act rashly. He could only hide the metal spoon for now. When night fell, Mike resumed his plan. Using the sharpened handle, he gradually widened the crack between the door planks. To avoid detection, he stopped every 2 minutes or so to listen carefully for any sounds outside. At the slightest hint of anything unusual, he'd immediately freeze, and only after confirming it was safe would he continue. After 2 solid days of scraping, the wooden plank had clearly begun to loosen. To get his body through, he'd need to remove 3 planks. As the gap became more obvious, Mike rolled blackened bits of paper into thin strips and stuffed them into the cracks to block the light. He handled every detail with extreme caution. During the day, Mike acted as compliant as any other prisoner while secretly observing the layout of the first-floor guard room. At night, he continuously scraped away wood shavings. Finally, one evening, he determined the crack was large enough to remove the planks. Mike inserted the spoon handle into the gap and pressed down hard, but the spoon snapped clean in 2. Mike grabbed a rag and wrapped the spoon tightly, but aside from making a harsh creaking sound, the plank showed no response. Clearly, he needed another spoon. The next day at mealtime, Mike acted quickly, smoothly snagging one from the windowsill. Back in his cell, he didn't hesitate for a second. He immediately inserted both soup spoons into the gap and pried with all his strength. Because the upper plank was already weakened, a large chunk broke off completely. Mike instantly replaced the fallen piece of wood, then gathered up the scattered splinters and filled them back in, determined to leave no trace that the guards might notice. Next, he carefully colored over the exposed white scrape marks with pencil and finally hung a towel over the upper part of the door. Until his plan succeeded completely, he wouldn't allow a single flaw to remain. After days of repeated attempts, Mike finally removed the wooden planks from the cell door completely. But he didn't rush into action. Instead, he immediately reinstalled the planks and replaced all the loose wood chips. Only after repeatedly calculating the time needed to remove and reinstall them did he take the planks down again. With no guards in the hallway, Mike grew bolder. He climbed along the exposed steel bars up to the skylight and hauled himself onto the roof. Since his cell was on the top floor, this was his only way out. However, escaping from such a high roof required a rope long enough and strong enough to support him. And that presented a problem. Mike had no idea where to get rope. One day after washing up and returning to his cell, he stared at the bed in front of him and a sudden thought flashed through his mind. Mike immediately threw back the bedding and got to work. He carefully twisted and extracted the steel wire from inside the mattress, then tore a piece of fabric into long strips and wrapped the straightened wire inside. Next, he stepped on one end of the fabric strip with his foot, gripped it tightly with both hands, and kept twisting until the strip was wound into a sturdy rope-like form, then wound the wire back in the opposite direction to reinforce it. Mike then looked up at the light fixture on the wall, propped the entire bed at an angle against the wall, carefully climbed up, and easily removed the lamp cover. He used the spoon to unscrew the screws holding the lamp cover one by one, ultimately obtaining 4 metal frame pieces. Mike didn't waste any time. He immediately secured the metal bars against something hard and bent them with all his might, shaping them into hooks. Then he pulled out a steel wire from under the mattress, aligned a straight metal bar with the hook, and wrapped them tightly together with the wire, adding extra reinforcement at the base. In this way, Mike pieced together a steel wire rope strong enough to bear weight. After testing, the rope could fully support his weight, but the length still wasn't enough. Just then, a package arrived from his family, and the clothing inside was like a gift from heaven. Without hesitation, Mike tore all the clothes into fabric strips to continue making rope. Before long, all the preparations were finally complete. Mike planned to find the right moment in the near future to officially execute his escape. He then hurried to check on his fellow inmates' progress, only to find that his cellmate had run into trouble. The man said he couldn't pry open his cell door using Mike's method, so he'd come up with an alternative plan and written it on a slip of paper. However, Mike immediately rejected his cellmate's idea. The next day, he was horrified to discover that the inmate had been taken for interrogation. When the man returned, whenever Mike tried to approach and talk, he was immediately chased away by guards. The two could no longer communicate. The situation with his cellmate had become a complete unknown, and Mike was powerless to do anything about it. During one yard time, Mike suddenly noticed his cellmate's demeanor was clearly off, and a strong sense of unease washed over him. He decided to act alone within the next 2 days. But just then, Mike was suddenly called to the warden's office. The warden coldly informed him that his case had been closed and he would soon face execution by firing squad. Hearing this news, Mike felt extremely anxious, worried that all his careful preparations would come to nothing. He resolved to act immediately, but when he returned to his cell, he was shocked to discover a stranger, a new inmate, in the room. His escape plan was completely derailed at that moment. With only days left until his execution, Mike hadn't even finished the rope he needed to escape, and now there was another cellmate in the way. Mike even suspected the warden had deliberately planted this person to watch him, so he didn't dare reveal even a hint of his escape plans. But time was running out, and Mike's options were dwindling. Either eliminate John or find a way to convince him to escape together. Mike began making conversation with John, probing to find out why he was imprisoned. After several exchanges, he'd basically determined that John was just an ordinary prisoner, but he still couldn't be sure whether the man could be trusted. If John really was the warden's informant, then months of planning would go completely down the drain. At that thought, Mike gritted his teeth and made an almost insane decision. The next day, after returning to his cell, he quietly hid the iron hook under the bed, then stared coldly at the sleeping John. But when it came to actually doing it, he hesitated. Mike, who had planned to strike while the opportunity was there, ultimately couldn't bring himself to go through with it. With the execution date drawing closer, Mike had no choice but to go all in. He decided to lay out his entire plan. But after hearing it, John thought it was impossible to succeed. If they failed, not only would they not escape, they might be executed on the spot. Mike had prepared for this. To dispel John's concerns, he demonstrated what he'd accomplished over the past days on the spot, and had even worked out a clear action plan for after the escape. When John saw those tools with his own eyes, he immediately committed to joining the plan. To be safe, the two tore apart all the bed sheets and made several extra ropes. After nightfall, they finally began. When everything around them had gone completely quiet, the two removed the door planks and climbed onto the roof, even taking off their shoes to avoid making noise. Soon they reached the edge of the roof. Below, only one guard paced back and forth on patrol. Mike had already figured out the man's routine. The guard only moved in areas covered by light and never approached the corners. Taking advantage of the guard's break, Mike signaled John to secure the hook and slide down the rope, reaching the corner first. When the guard approached again, Mike acted decisively and took care of him before signaling John to continue. He had John step on his shoulders to climb the high wall, then followed up the rope himself. Outside the wall was an internal prison corridor, also the prison's last line of defense. Although there were no fixed posts here, a guard would patrol on bicycle at regular intervals. Mike timed it perfectly. The instant the guard left, he swung the hook toward the opposite wall and pulled repeatedly to confirm it was secure. If they could just climb across the rope, they'd be free. But at that moment, Mike hesitated. He worried the rope couldn't bear the weight, worried the iron hook would suddenly come loose, and feared the patrolling guard would suddenly turn back and catch them red-handed. All sorts of possible disasters flashed rapidly through his mind. Just then, the prison bell rang 4 times, reminding him that time was running out. Mike finally made his decision. He'd risk everything for freedom. Mike quickly climbed across the rope. Fortunately, the rope made from bedsheets was strong enough. He reached the other side safely and successfully climbed over the final perimeter wall. Mike forcibly suppressed his inner excitement. After helping John down, the two didn't stop to celebrate. They immediately ran toward the distance, soon disappearing into the boundless night. Halfway through his meal, the prisoner suddenly dropped the spoon he was holding. He noticed that half of it had fallen into shadow. Mike paused thoughtfully, then kicked the spoon back toward the door and quietly covered it with his foot. Soon enough, the guard came to collect the meal trays. The careless guard didn't even glance down before gathering up the dishes and walking away. The moment the guard left, Mike snatched up the spoon and began grinding it repeatedly against the rough floor. Before long, he tested the sharpened utensil's effectiveness. To his surprise, with just a gentle pry, the wooden plank on the cell door immediately loosened. Seeing the enormous gap that suddenly appeared before him,